Talking point tonight is Quad securing the Indo-Pacific. That's our in focus tonight, Quad securing the Indo-Pacific. And to talk more about that, I'm joined by Mohan Kumar, a former diplomat. He's also the chairman of the RIS, and Professor Swaran Singh, who teaches at the Jawaharlal Nehru University in Delhi. Both gentlemen, many thanks for joining us. Professor Swaran Singh, the joint statement without naming Pakistan, China to some extent they did bring up, and Russia in the joint statement, at least without naming these countries. The joint statement did say so much, as much that the sort of aggression and these issues are key concerns for Quad.
I think joint statements are usually a combination of multiple pulls and pressures from all sides. And therefore, I think what you notice here in the joint statement is that Japan, for example, would have preferred a more clearer and stronger explanation and answer to what is happening in North Korea. United States would have wanted to make sure there's a stronger message from here on Ukraine. Australia would have wanted to avoid the variations that keep appearing either in the joint statement, but much more when the foreign ministers are addressing the press conference. And of course, in that sense, India seems to be the country that should be most satisfied from the joint statement here, because there is a detailed mention of protection of national sovereignty, standing against coercion, authoritarian regimes, rule of law, fair play, which is clearly a reference to China. Great deal of explanations on denouncing the use of terrorism, mention of Mumbai and Pathankot, endorsing position in that sense.
And denouncing terrorist proxies, Professor?
Absolutely. So India's position is clearly endorsed here. Then mention of Afghanistan and mention of democracy and then a 5-point initiative of ASEAN in Myanmar. So India seems to be, in that sense, able to put across its ideas and seek that endorsement from joint statement. But nevertheless, joint statement and particularly press briefings clearly show the continuing variations and in what direction they want to push, other than the fact that, Quad itself had a whole range of a dozen+ areas to focus on, primarily in development and non-traditional security areas. Of course, they need to focus much more, and they tried to talk about, last mile delivery of pandemic vaccines, which they had promised to, distribute 1.3 billion. It's about 400+ million which are distributed so far. That is a priority area. But they keep talking of everything else: capacity building, infrastructure building, maritime security, climate change, terror. So many talks. So it kind of becomes a bit too much wide and thin in that sense. And I think most important area is to focus on creating some kind of organizational structure. It is still being called dialogue, framework, grouping. So nomenclature itself is yet not clear. So I think consolidation to me is something, there's no two views about India, having put its clear stamp on what it wanted to see in the joint statement. But organization itself, Quad itself, needs to consolidate as to what it is and what it stands for, in terms of specific areas that it needs to focus on. Otherwise, the mantra of free, open, inclusive, prosperous Indo-Pacific, begins to look like lip service, unless they begin to sort of identify areas of joint workmanship. And last point, you heard just now, Foreign Minister addressing the press briefing saying 3 things are important: robust bilateral relationships, strategic convergence, and of course, sort of the shared values of democracy primarily. But these continue to appear more and more like cliche unless they come out with specific, unanimously agreed steps, implementable steps. And they should be focused on Indo-Pacific region rather than, looking at individual nations' priorities or whether they need to push for North Korea or Ukraine or Pakistan. These are not focus areas of the vision of the second incarnation of Quad. It is supposed to provide stability, security, prosperity in Indo-Pacific region. What is the common message for Indo-Pacific region here? I think that central argument needs to be strengthened.
Okay. Thank you very much, both gentlemen, for joining me on the show tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.